Solo Board Gaming Night here, and I want to say thanks to each and every one of you for keeping the conversations alive in my channel and on my videos. It really makes what I do a blast. The following video you're about to watch was chosen by Chris W. for always being awesome and an active member of the channel. Thank you. I hope that you and everyone else enjoys the video. Board games can lead to an absolutely epic and amazing experiences. You could don the cape and cowl of the most famous Dark Knight. You could web swing across New York City as your favorite webhead. You can create your own version of Jurassic Park. You can also even attempt to escape haunted trains. Rulebooks are your first introduction and impression of a board game. It could either set you up for excitement or lead to frustration and make the first game feel like a nightmare. Whether you're about to learn and read a rulebook on a game that's been around for a while, or you're about to embark on a modern, new adventure, rulebooks can absolutely either make or break an experience. Over the past 2 years, I've read several rulebooks, and I'm going to share with you the best and worst rulebooks I have ever read. World of Warcraft: Wrath of the Lich King was one of the first pandemic-style games I have ever played. And although the game's not overly complex and the rulebook's not overly long, the rulebook has one of the most clear examples and detailed instructions on how to play the game I have ever read in any of the rulebooks or board games I've played. It made my first game an absolute blast and probably one of the smoothest experiences I've had with a board game to date. Everything from how the cards were explained to how the mechanics and pretty much everything worked, top to bottom. I had almost no questions at all or even doubts throughout my entire first playthrough, and every playthrough after that was even easier. That's why World of Warcraft: Wrath of the Lich King remains one of my favorite rulebooks ever made. Adventure Tactics: Damien's Tower was another board game in which the rulebook was very well made. Apart from the sorting the cards, once you cross that hurdle, the rulebook does an exceptional job walking through every aspect of the game when it comes to the mechanics and setup in such a way that it really makes it, even if you do have questions, easy to find what you're looking for. And the art that's strewn about the entire rulebook is exceptional. The rulebook, once again, really does help with the setup, considering there's a lot of things that you're going to have to be placing on your table. Not only that, the scenario book that comes with it is a great companion that just fills in the blanks of a lot of questions you may have. Overall, this was a very smooth experience, and I wouldn't say it's the lightest game or the easiest game to learn. It's not the heaviest, but considering all the mechanics thrown your way, it really does an exceptional job teaching you how to play the game. Till this day, Adventure Tactics has one of my favorite leveling up systems that I have ever played, and I'll never forget that. With that said, that's why Adventure Tactics: Damien's Tower has one of my favorite rulebooks of all time. Role Player Adventures is another game that I had a really great and enjoyable time when it came to reading the rulebook. It wasted absolutely no time teaching me what the game expected from me. The boards, cards, and maps were explained with incredible detail. From there, everything like game setup, key concepts, item use, skill checks, combat, and how to level up and save your game was easily and clearly explained. We were even given a very easy to read glossary. Role Player's Adventures rulebook was so well written that I was exploring the map and experiencing all the events within the map in no time. It felt natural. Even when all the checks would be done, it just felt smooth. It was a smooth overall experience, and I was able to understand everything that was going on at all times. It really felt like an homage to the old games like Sam and Max, Grim Fandango, and Monkey Island. It really felt like it was a point and click adventure in board game form. And that's what made Role Player Adventures Rulebook so great for me. Recently, I was able to get my hands on Burn Cycle. And if you know chip theory games, you know that you're going to expect a very extremely complicated game. Thankfully, Burn Cycle's Learn to Play rulebook was miraculously very well made, considering how complex Burn Cycle could be, and any chip theory game for that matter. This rulebook was made exceptionally well. I mean, it really stands head and shoulders above its competitions when it comes to the complexity of the game versus how well it explains it. But what it really does well is the tutorial included. It gives you a step-by-step tutorial that pretty much is going to answer all the questions you're going to have throughout your adventure. Sadly, not everything is printed on the rulebook, and you have to print the other half of the tutorial or download the PDF. But overall, the tutorial and the rulebook for Burn Cycle was probably and is probably one of Chip Theory Games' best rulebooks. However, we'll come back to Chip Theory Games later on in the video. As a matter of fact, let's get back to Chip Theory Games now and talk about Too Many Bones. Now, Too Many Bones is my favorite game, one of my favorite games, but the rulebook is absolutely one of the most daunting rulebooks I have ever read. Now, don't get me wrong, it's really well written. All the information you need to know to learn how to play the game, it's all in there. However, there's a lot of information you have to consume and absorb before you're even capable of playing a game even half right. It really is difficult to learn. There's so many game mechanics that you're gonna have to learn. It doesn't all fit in the rulebook. Later expansions included reference guides, which were incredibly helpful. However, that doesn't negate the fact that you actually have to learn each character, and each character has their own rule sets of their own. It's like playing a new game for every character you choose to play. I mean, it's incredibly daunting, incredibly complex, and gives you a lot that you have to learn before you really start enjoying the game. Towards the back of the rules book, there is some sort of tutorial. However, you're still going to be left with a lot of unanswered questions that in turn is going to have you flipping back and forth through the rule book, searching for your answers, or scouring the internet for any FAQ that you can find to get your question answered. But you'll be referencing your character reference cards countless times, as well as the rule references included, before you really feel confident and comfortable with Too Many Bones. And that's why Too Many Bones, in my opinion, has one of the worst rulebooks around. If you watched my review of G.I. Joe the deck building game, you'll know that I absolutely loved the game. However, out of the 32-minute playtime, over 8 minutes were dedicated simply focusing on all of the errors that were within the rulebook. Starting with the table of contents, it'll let you know the player cards, but it will not specify what is within those player cards. During the setup, it doesn't even let you know how to set up your main deck. And what's worse, the story setup, the illustration within is completely wrong. Without the rulebook letting players know what makes up the main deck, how are newcomers to the deck building genre gonna learn how to play this deck building game? They even forget to mention what the basic deck is and where it goes. It's in the picture though. They didn't even include an example of what an ongoing effect is. There's an illustration with an example that includes an icon. The problem is, they never mentioned anywhere in the rulebook what this icon, or any icon means. To make matters worse, in the actual example, they reference that icon and get the rule wrong in the rulebook. It's absolutely mind-boggling. Honestly, after that first impression I had with that rulebook, I really was not expecting to like G.I. Joe the deck building game at all whatsoever. However, thankfully, I knew enough about deck building games to kind of put two and two together, figure things out along the way, and kind of make it out on the other side incredibly happy with the outcome. I mean, the game is incredible. It's one of my favorite deck building games. But that rule book really is a deterrent, especially for newcomers to the deck building genre. I have no idea what that must feel like, but this has to be a horrible first experience for anyone that delves into the deck building genre for the first time and uses or chooses G.I. Joe as their first deck building game. That's why I think G.I. Joe the deck building game has one of the worst rule books I have ever read. I quickly want to mention Plaid Hat Games. Their Mice and Mystics and Aftermath games have terrible rulebooks. Thankfully, the recent Familiar Tales rectified that and actually created a pretty spectacular rulebook. But now it's come time for me to mention the all-time worst rulebook I have ever read, the revered Mage Knight. Let me explain. When I first got into the hobby, I was introduced through Funkoverse. From there, I wanted to know more of what this hobby had to offer. I went from Gotham City Under Siege to Legendary Marvel. And just like everyone that's new to the board game hobby, I quickly searched what are the best solo board games around. And Mage Knight was one of the games that were inescapable. Mage Knight showed up in almost every single list. So I made my way to my local game shop and picked a copy of Mage Knight for myself. I finally got home, and after I opened the box, before me were two, not one, but two books, a rule book and a walkthrough book. At least the miniatures came pre-painted. That was kind of exciting. You see, by this time, board games and rule books still felt fairly foreign to me. It was feeling like learning a second language or a new language. It was hard to wrap my head around it. And I read the walkthrough and the rule book, but none of it made sense to me. At the end, it felt like it just had a whole bunch of deck of cards, and I had a lot of tokens in which I didn't even know what they were used for or their purpose, and two boards that I didn't know what to do with. So I did what any sane person would have done. I read the rulebook and walkthrough again. This couldn't be right. It felt like I was alone on this earth. Completely alone, as if I was the only one that didn't understand what this so-called Mage Knight was. Was it the universe posing some sort of sick joke to make me feel like I was all alone, as if I was never ever meant to be able to play or experience what Mage Knight was? Is this it? Was this how it was going to end? After all that reading, after all that struggling, was this how my board game experience was going to end? But then it hit me. I realized that whoever put the walkthrough and the rulebook together, they flip the pages around. They were intertwined. The pages that were supposed to be inside of the rule book were inside of the walkthrough, and the pages that were supposed to be part of the walkthrough were in the rule book. It was all a mess. Like if the person that was creating this rule book knew how difficult this game was, and they were just laughing as they were putting this rule book together. If you look closely, you could see where I was trying to undo the staple and then like putting the pages back to where they belong with the pages they belonged with, and actually slip the staple back into the right holes. And if you look closely, you could see I accidentally punctured another hole where it was not supposed to be, making the rulebook look uneven. It was an entire mess. But this whole entire time, I thought it was me. I thought I was the problem. So I did what any sane person would do. I read the rule book again, but this time it was different. This time I was going to understand the Mage Knight. You see, it wasn't my fault. All the pages were all switched and swapped with one another, but once you look at the movements and you start looking at the interactions and what all of the iconography means and how to be able to react to them, Mage Knight actually became an amazing experience. But because of all the things that I went through leading up to it, I will still have to say that the rulebook for Mage Knight is absolutely one of the worst rulebooks I have ever experienced playing board games. So that's it. That was my best and worst rulebooks I have ever experienced. The last 2 years really have felt like an adventure of sorts. I've read so many rulebooks and played so many board games that it really feels like I've been sent to another place. It's been really fun. But I also know I haven't even begun to completely search what this hobby has to offer. So let me know what's been your favorite board game rulebook or your worst board game rulebook. I want to know your story. I want to hear it. And with that said and done, this was Solo Board Gaming Night. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great game night. Take care. Oh, that's how you do it.